The rain was falling lightly on the stained glass windows of the Montenegro mansion when Clara arrived, carrying a worn suitcase and her heart torn between fear and hope. The driver who had picked her up remained silent, as if words were not allowed to exist on this route. The iron gate opened slowly, revealing once beautiful gardens now overgrown with weeds and neglect. The imposing house, shrouded in shadows, seemed to hold secrets that time dared not reveal. Clara took a deep breath. This would not just be a house where she would work, but a place where something within her would also be tested. Doña Elsa, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with a stern look, sizing Clara up from head to toe. Her husky voice sounded firm as she explained the house rules: strict hours, silence after 9, and most importantly, no questions about the family's past. Clara simply nodded, feeling a chill run down her arms. There was a heaviness in the air, something between grief and guilt. As she entered, the cold atmosphere enveloped her like a cloak, and she felt as if the house itself was breathing pain. In the main hall, Clara was introduced to Daniel Montenegro. He was elegant but distant, his gaze fixed on something that wasn't there. He greeted her with a brief nod and pointed to the office door, ending any attempt at conversation. Everything about him exuded control, even the way he avoided looking at the portraits on the walls. Clara realized it wasn't just a matter of formality. It was as if this man fought daily to keep from feeling. Soon after, Clara met Lara, the 7-year-old girl she was supposed to be caring for. The child was sitting near the window, hugging a worn teddy bear. She didn't respond to the greeting, nor did she look away from the garden outside. Clara tried to smile, but the silence between them felt like a high, insurmountable wall. There was a profound loneliness in that small body, as if the girl's soul were locked away somewhere inaccessible. That night, alone in her room, Clara thought about the sick mother she had left behind in the small town and her dream of studying psychology postponed by the need to work. She felt tired, but determined to make a difference, even if it was simply by offering companionship to a child lost in its own silence. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the sound echoed through the hallways like an ancient whisper. Clara didn't know it, but that sound would be the prelude to something that would change all the lives within that house. Over the next few days, Clara observed the family's habits. Daniel left early and returned late, immersed in commitments and meetings that seemed never-ending. Lara barely spoke, spending hours drawing meaningless shapes or observing the neglected garden. Breakfast was always silent, and Doña Elsa paced back and forth, trying to fill the void with tasks. The mansion was an elegant tomb, and mourning hid behind the perfection of the furniture and rules. One afternoon, Clara decided to try something different. She sat on the floor of Lara's room and began to put together a puzzle, without saying a word. She waited. Little by little, the girl approached, curious. She touched a piece, hesitated, and then fit it into place. It was a small gesture, but for Clara, it was like seeing a ray of sunshine breaking through gray clouds. A timid, almost invisible, but true beginning.
When Daniel arrived that night, he found Clara reading a story to Lara, who listened silently. The man simply watched from the doorway, without approaching. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of gratitude and fear, but he chose to turn away. Clara noticed the movement and understood. He wasn't ready. Perhaps he still loved the past so deeply that he feared the present. Before falling asleep, Clara looked out the window and saw the garden. Even in the darkness, the wilted flowers seemed to beg for life. She felt an urge to go down and touch them, but she restrained herself. It was still too early to defy the house rules. Yet something inside her whispered, that's where the soul of this family is buried, and one day she would have the courage to dig it up. In the silence of the early morning, Lara woke and went to the window. On the other side, the wind blew an old garden curtain. For a moment, Clara and the girl looked at each other, each in their own room, united by the same feeling, that the true mystery of the house lay not in the walls, but in the memories that time tried to hide. Before the garden of this story blooms, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because if you believe that love and hope can still heal even the deepest pain, this is the place for you. Hit the subscribe button and come feel with me every emotion, every new beginning, every flower that blooms even after the storm. The next morning, Clara tried a different approach. She brought paints and paper to Lara's room, trying to bring color to the gray routine. The girl watched silently without touching anything. Then Clara began painting alone without asking for input. She drew flowers, trees, and a vibrant blue sky. When she finished, she looked at Lara and said softly, "Your garden would be like this if you could smile again." For the first time, the girl's eyes filled with unshed tears. During lunch, Daniel noticed that Lara was different, more attentive, less apathetic. But when he saw Clara smiling at the girl, his expression darkened. He avoided any mention of his mother, any attempt to relive the past. For him, feelings were dangerous distractions. Grief, he believed, was a wound that only healed when forgotten. But Clara saw it differently. To heal, one must remember. In the following days, Clara noticed that Lara always stopped at the window overlooking the back of the mansion. The forgotten garden seemed to call to her, like a distant echo. Once, Clara discreetly followed her and saw her standing by the iron gate that separated the lawn from the forbidden area. Lara held a small dried flower between her fingers. When Clara approached, the girl quickly hid it, as if harboring a precious secret.
That evening, Clara discreetly asked Donna Elza about the garden. The housekeeper hesitated before answering. Mrs. Montenegro loved that place. She and you would spend entire afternoons there. After it happened, you had everything locked up. The woman's grave tone made it clear this was not a permitted topic. But Elza's gaze, though stern, held compassion. Perhaps one day he'll let the garden live again, he murmured before walking away. Clara felt she had found the heart of the story. The garden was not just a physical space, but a mirror of everything that was dead within that family. Every day, the desire to open that gate grew, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. She felt that somehow the garden was calling to her, too. One cloudy afternoon, Clara took Lara to play in the backyard. As they piled pebbles on the ground, the girl glanced toward the garden gate. Clara asked, almost in a whisper, "Have you been in there yet, Lara?" The child shook her head silently, then pointed to her heart and whispered, "She's scared." It was the first thing Clara heard from the girl, and it was enough to confirm that the real wall wasn't made of iron, but of pain. Clara knelt before her and said tenderly, "It's okay to be afraid. What matters is what we do with it." Lara looked at her for a long moment and then gently took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but Clara felt that touch said much more than words. Daniel watched everything from the office window. He saw his daughter smile for the first time in months, a shy smile but genuine, and at the same time he felt an uneasiness in his chest. Something inside him was stirring, and he couldn't tell if it was hope or fear of losing control. The memories he'd tried to bury were slowly beginning to surface. That night, while Clara was putting away her toys, she found a drawing on Lara's desk. It showed a woman in a blue dress holding flowers, and beside her, a dark-haired figure, herself. In the corner, the girl had written in crooked letters, "My garden." Clara felt the tears well up. The wall was beginning to give way. The days became a silent but less cold routine. Lara no longer hid as much and sometimes followed Clara through the hallways, watching her with shy curiosity. One morning, while tidying up the toys, Clara heard a delicate sound coming from upstairs. Laughter. She discreetly ran down the hallway and saw Lara playing with a teddy bear. The sound lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to fill the house with something forgotten: life. Later, while serving tea in the library, Clara noticed a dusty portrait on the mantelpiece. A smiling, blonde-haired woman holding a baby Lara in her arms. The name engraved on the frame read, Helena Montenegro. Helena's gaze seemed to radiate warmth, and Clara felt a lump in her throat. When Daniel entered the room, she discreetly turned the portrait over. He noticed the gesture and said, without emotion, "There's no need to disturb old things." The coldness of her words contrasted with the pain contained in her gaze. That night, while Clara was putting Lara to bed, Clara asked softly, "Do you remember your mommy?" Lara hesitated, hugged her pillow, and simply replied, "She smelled like flowers." That was enough. Clara understood that the garden, the silence, and the absence were intertwined in an invisible knot of memories. It was there, in the forgotten space of the house, that the girl's soul still sought refuge. Determined, Clara sought out Doña Elsa the next morning. She found the housekeeper cleaning the ancient hallways, where time seemed to have stood still. "Elsa, what happened to the garden?" she asked cautiously. The woman stopped, looked around, and sighed. "It was Doña Elena's favorite place. She and Lara would spend hours there, planting daisies and lavender. After it happened, you had the gates locked. You said nothing good blooms in the midst of pain." The words sounded like a sentence. Clara felt the weight of grief hanging in the air. "What if the garden could still bloom?" she asked. Elsa smiled wistfully. "Maybe it needs someone who believes in that." Those words echoed in Clara's mind throughout the day. She began to think that to heal Lara, she would also need to heal that space, restore to it what time had stolen: color, scent, and joy. Late in the afternoon, Clara walked to the garden gate. It was rusty and covered in vines. She touched the metal with her fingertips and felt a shiver run through her. Something inside her whispered that she was about to cross an invisible line between what was permitted and what was necessary. When she turned to go back, she noticed Lara watching her from the porch, silent, as if she too were waiting for her to do the same. Later, at dinner, Clara noticed Daniel was more distant than usual. He barely touched his food. His eyes seemed lost in another time. "You must miss her," Clara ventured gently. Daniel looked up, surprised by the boldness of her statement. "Missing is too small a word," he replied, and stood up before she could say anything else. Wounds, Clara thought, sometimes don't bleed. They fester in silence. Before going to sleep, Clara opened the window and saw the wind blowing toward the garden. "I could have sworn I heard the faint tinkling of bells, as if the ancient flowers were whispering a request." And for the first time, she made a silent promise: "I will bring life back to this place." The next morning, when she went down for breakfast, she found Lara waiting for her, holding a dried flower in her hand. "It's from the garden," the girl said, holding it out. Clara's heart sank. Perhaps the new beginning had already begun. Clara began dedicating small portions of her day to simple activities with Lara. They drew pictures, baked cakes, and created stories with rag dolls. The girl still spoke little, but her eyes began to shine again. She knew she was building something fragile, a bridge between past and present, made of trust and affection. One morning, Lara appeared with a pair of scissors in her hand and an innocent question: "Can we cut the weeds in the garden?" Clara smiled in surprise and replied, "Not yet, but we can start with the flowers we have." Together, they spent hours tending to the forgotten pots on the porch.
The girl's delicate touch on the petals felt almost like a healing gesture. Clara realized that more than teaching, she simply needed to allow Lara to feel.
Daniel watched from a distance, pretending to be busy with reports. Seeing his daughter smiling was a bittersweet combination, both a comfort and a torture. This woman, who had arrived just a few weeks earlier, was challenging the emotional walls he had so painstakingly erected. At night, alone in his office, Daniel looked at Helena's portrait and murmured, "She reminds me of you, even in the way she insists on bringing life where there is pain." One afternoon, the weather suddenly changed and a storm brewed. Clara ran through the hallways looking for Lara, who had disappeared. He found the girl at the garden gate, shivering in the light rain. "You can't go in there, Lara," he exclaimed, but the child replied softly, "Mommy's in there." The girl's steady, serene gaze made Clara's heart freeze. She hugged her, promising, "One day we'll go in together, okay? But only when the garden wants it." After that day, something changed between them. Lara began to trust her more, to reach out to Clara spontaneously. She would spend afternoons sitting on her lap, asking for stories about places that bloom again. Each tale Clara invented seemed to plant a new seed within the girl. The house, previously silent, began to echo softly with laughter. One quiet night, Clara heard light footsteps in the hallway. It was Daniel. He stopped at Lara's bedroom door and watched the two of them sleeping, their hands intertwined. He stood there for a moment, motionless. What he saw disarmed him. The simple tenderness, the warmth of something he thought he'd lost forever. He returned to his office and for the first time in years found himself unable to work. In the following days, the bond between Clara and Lara strengthened. The girl began to talk more, to laugh, and even to joke with other employees. Donna Elsa watched with discreet tears. "You have a gift, young lady," she said one afternoon. Clara smiled and replied, "I'm just helping the garden breathe." Little did she know that metaphor was becoming reality. One Sunday, the weather broke through the clouds, gilding the ancient leaves. The girl pointed to the gate and asked, "When will he open?" Clara took a deep breath and replied, "When his heart is ready." She knew she wasn't just talking about the garden, but about Daniel too. As they walked back inside, the wind blew hard and the gate latch creaked, as if answering the call. Clara looked back and felt something was about to change. The house, the garden, and even the silences seemed suspended in midair, waiting for the right moment to blossom.
The morning dawned cloudy, and the air smelled of wet earth, as if the sky sensed something important. Clara woke before dawn and went to check on Lara. She found the girl standing there, wearing a little jacket and holding the same dried flower from days before. "Can I show you something?" Lara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Without waiting for an answer, she walked out toward the garden gate. Clara's heart raced. She knew she was about to cross a threshold that would change everything. The rusty hinges creaked as Lara pushed open the gate. The sound seemed to echo through the air like an ancient call. The garden was covered in dry leaves and twisted branches, the dead flowers lying on the ground like faded memories. Clara paused for a moment, smelling the damp air, the bittersweet scent of time standing still. It was a sad, and at the same time sacred place. Lara walked to the center, knelt, and began digging in the earth with her small hands. "This is where she was waiting for me," the girl said without looking at Clara. The nanny knelt beside her, helping her brush aside the leaves. The damp earth hid ancient roots, and there, among them, Lara found a small rag doll. "It was hers," she murmured, her tears silent. Clara hugged her, saying nothing.
The wind blew stronger, and a few dry petals fell away, swirling through the air, as if the garden had sighed for the first time in a long time. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Images of the garden returned to her mind like an insistent call. She knew Daniel wouldn't allow them to continue, but something inside her told her this was the way forward. The next day, she bought lavender and daisy seeds, the same flowers in Helena's portrait, and began discreetly planting them in pots on the balcony. Lara helped silently, intently, as if participating in a secret ritual. During lunch, Daniel noticed his daughter's dirt-stained hands. "What have you been doing?" he asked, without raising his voice. "Planting memories," Lara replied, unaware of the impact she was making. Daniel looked away, his fork trembling between his fingers. Clara held her breath, ready for a reprimand, but he only murmured, "I don't want her to go back to that place. Is that clear?" Clara nodded, but inside she felt she couldn't obey. The next afternoon, Clara and Lara returned to the garden. The girl laughed as they weeded a small flower bed. "Look, the ants are working," she said, delighted. Clara smiled. The child was alive again. But from the balcony, Daniel watched, his face a mixture of anger and fear. When he came down and found them there, his tone echoed coldly, "I told you this place must not be touched." The silence that followed was heavy. Clara tried to explain, but he interrupted her. "You don't understand, Miss Duarte. This garden killed my wife." The words fell like a blow. Lara began to cry, and Clara instinctively hugged her. "It wasn't the garden, Mr. Montenegro. It was fate. But what died here can bloom again, if you let it." Daniel turned away without answering, his face contorted with pain. Clara stood still, her heart clenching, feeling she had just touched the deepest wound of a man she had long since given up on feeling. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house grew tense. Daniel avoided Clara, but watched from afar. Every time he saw Lara smile, something inside him stirred, an echo of the happiness he'd lost. But fear made him retreat. Clara, on the other hand, didn't give up. She continued tending the garden little by little, always with Lara by her side, believing that each seed was a silent prayer. The garden began to change, and with it, so did the hearts within the house.
On the last afternoon of the week, Clara and Lara found a small purple flower growing among the rocks. "It's lavender!" the girl cried, overcome with emotion. Clara hugged her with tears in her eyes. They didn't know it, but from the window, Daniel was watching, and for the first time, he cried too, silently. The next morning, Clara awoke to the sound of the piano coming from the main hall. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Coming downstairs, she saw Daniel sitting at the instrument, playing a soft, mournful melody. When he noticed her presence, he stopped abruptly. "Sorry, I haven't played since," he began, but his voice trailed off. Clara simply replied, "It was beautiful." Daniel looked away, embarrassed. The sound of the notes seemed to have opened a window to memories he'd tried to keep closed. Later, Clara and Lara returned to the garden. The first flowers had sprouted, shy but vibrant. The air was lighter, and even the birds seemed to have returned. Lara ran among the plants, laughing, while Clara watched with a small smile. "She's becoming a child again," said Donna Elsa, who was watching from the porch. "And Mr. Montenegro?" Clara asked. "He still lives between yesterday and maybe," the housekeeper replied with a wise look. That night, Daniel called Clara into his office. The atmosphere was heavy, the clock ticking away stiffly. "I want you to stop the garden," he said bluntly. Clara took a deep breath. "With all due respect, Mr. Montenegro, I can't. It's what's healing your daughter." Daniel stood up, irritated. "Healing, or reminding me every day of what I lost?"
Clara kept her gaze steady. "Maybe you need to remember in order to move on." The words hung in the air like a soft, sure blow. Daniel didn't respond. In the following days, the tension between them increased, but something invisible connected them. Daniel began to observe Clara more closely, the way she spoke to Lara, the care with every gesture, the serenity she radiated. It confused him. He began to feel something he thought was dead, hope, and with it came the fear of allowing himself to live again. One afternoon, while clearing the flower bed, Clara and Lara found an envelope buried among the roots of a rose bush. Inside was an old letter written by Helena. The delicate handwriting read, "If one day I'm no longer here, tell Lara that the flowers bloom again, even after the coldest winters." Clara was silent, feeling the words penetrate like sunshine after a storm. She handed the letter to Daniel that night, wordlessly. He read it silently, and the tears he had been holding back finally fell. The next day, Daniel appeared in the garden for the first time in 2 years. The sun was shining weakly, and the scent of lavender filled the air. "She loved that scent," he said, his voice breaking. Clara simply nodded, respecting the moment. Lara ran and hugged him by the legs, saying nothing. Daniel knelt and, with a trembling voice, replied, "Sorry, my love, I took so long to come back." The girl hugged him tightly, and time seemed to stand still. For the first time in the garden, witnessed tears that were not of pain, but of release.
In the following days, the entire house changed. The windows were opened, fresh air entered, and the silence transformed into the sound of footsteps, laughter, and piano. The garden flourished, and with it, the souls of those who had learned to let the past rest. Clara, silently, knew that love was blossoming, not only between father and daughter, but also in a field she never expected to cultivate, her own heart. The following days brought a different calm, as if the house breathed a sigh of relief after years of silence. The garden, once dead, now displayed shy flowers opening in the sun. Lara ran between the flower beds, and Daniel, from time to time, watched her with a restrained smile, trying to adjust to the light that was returning to his life. Clara watched it all with a heavy heart, happy for Lara, but uneasy about the emotional distance Daniel still maintained. One afternoon, while picking up toys in the yard, Clara heard footsteps behind her. It was Daniel. "The garden is beautiful," he said, almost hesitantly. "It is, Mr. Montenegro, because someone finally let it bloom." He looked away, as if those words exposed him more than he'd intended. "Helena loved lavender," he murmured. Clara smiled slightly. "Then it's only right that they live here again." There was a silence heavy, not with coldness, but with memories. From that day on, Daniel began spending more time in the garden. He watched Clara and Lara, sometimes helping with small gestures, fixing the broken bench, watering some plants. He didn't say much, but his presence was a sign of change. Lara, sensing the mood, smiled as if she understood something the adults still denied. The air between the three became lighter, but the more harmony grew, the more Daniel seemed to fight it. One night, Daniel called Clara into his office. The lamplight illuminated scattered papers and a half-empty bottle of wine. "I don't want you to be fooled," he said bluntly. "All of this is temporary. Lara needs you, but I—" He trailed off, unable to continue. Clara remained calm, despite the knot in her chest. "Don't worry, Mr. Montenegro. I'm not here for illusions. I'm here because I believe that love, even when wounded, can still be healed." Daniel simply stared at her silently, his gaze mingling gratitude and fear. The next morning, something changed in his behavior. He avoided Clara, seemed colder, as if trying to erase the closeness that had arisen. Lara, sensing the distance, withdrew again. "Is Daddy mad?" she asked the nanny.
No, my dear, he just forgot how to speak when his heart is confused. Lara thought for a moment and replied, then we can teach him again. Clara smiled. Sometimes children understood love better than adults. In the following days, tension grew. Daniel tried to return to his work routine, immersing himself in meetings and business deals. But even from afar, his thoughts returned to the garden and to Clara. Memories of Helena mingled with recent images of the young Nanny smiling in the sunshine. Guilt gnawed at him. Loving again felt like a betrayal, so he did what he knew best: walk away.
One afternoon, Clara found Lara crying in the garden. "He doesn't come to play anymore," the girl said. Clara hugged her, trying to hide the pain she also felt. "Sometimes adults hide when they're afraid to feel." "But fear doesn't make flowers grow," Lara replied, with a wisdom that made Clara smile through her tears. In that moment, she realized the girl was healed, and that the one who needed healing most now was her father. That night, the garden was covered in dew. Clara sat alone on the stone bench, gazing at the flowers beneath the moon. She heard footsteps. It was Daniel. He approached slowly, his face tired, his gaze distant. "I try, Clara, but every time I look at you and her, I feel like I'm betraying Helena's memory." She stood, looking at him tenderly. "Perhaps honoring her memory is precisely allowing love to live on." Daniel looked away, tears in his eyes, and murmured, "You speak as if you're not afraid." "I am, Daniel, but I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what we do despite it." The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. Daniel reached out hesitantly and touched her hand for a moment, brief but intense. Clara felt her heart pound, not from the touch, but from the fragility he allowed her to reveal. When he pulled away, she knew. The garden was blooming, but the pain was not yet over. The next morning, Clara awoke with a strange feeling. The house was quieter than usual. As she descended the stairs, she found Doña Elsa standing against the main wall of the hallway, holding a damp cloth. "What happened?" Clara asked. The housekeeper pointed to the old portrait of Helena Montenegro, which Daniel had ordered removed months earlier. He asked to put it back. Clara was speechless. It was as if the past were returning to take its place. When Daniel came down, his eyes met Clara's, and for a moment the air seemed suspended. "She deserves to be where she's always been," he said simply. Clara realized that his gesture wasn't about mourning, but about acceptance. It was the first time he'd spoken of Helena without pain, only with longing. However, the deepest wounds rarely healed without bleeding first, and this one was about to open. That afternoon, Clara found Lara standing before the portrait, observing it silently. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" she asked. The girl nodded and replied, "But I don't think she would want us to be sad forever." She bent down, touching her face. "I think you're absolutely right." It was incredible how the girl, in her purity, understood what adults were slow to accept, that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates. Later, while organizing Lara's room, Clara found a small wooden box hidden under the closet. Inside were photo clippings and a folded note. It was from Helena, written shortly before her death. "I know Daniel will try to hide from the pain, but tell him, if it's ever possible, that love doesn't fade. It changes shape." Clara's hands trembled. Those words were both a blessing and a responsibility.
That night, Clara took the note to Daniel. He read it silently, his eyes welling up. "She was always stronger than me.
he murmured.
No, she just knew that true love doesn't end when someone leaves. It continues in the people who stay. Daniel stood still, and then, on impulse, picked up the portrait and hung it back on the living room wall with his own hands. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. Lara, upon seeing it, ran and hugged him. "Now she can see the garden bloom again," the girl said. Daniel laughed through his tears. "Yes, she can, my love. Yes, she can." But fate, as always, would test this newfound peace. Days later, an unexpected visit to the mansion brought back memories Daniel wasn't prepared to face. A former business partner and family friend who painfully mentioned Helena and the accident. The wound reopened. That night, Daniel drank too much, locked himself in his office, and, in a fit of despair, yelled at Clara when she tried to help him. "You don't understand! Nothing will bring her back!" The sound of his voice echoed through the house. Lara, frightened, cried upstairs. Clara, tears in her eyes, replied simply, "I don't want to bring her back, Daniel. I just want you back." The silence that followed was devastating. He stood there, breathing heavily, until he murmured, "Maybe I don't know how anymore." And then he walked out, leaving Clara alone in the hallway, her heart broken. That night, Helena's portrait seemed to watch her sweetly, and Clara, through her tears, silently promised that she would not give up, not on Lara, not on Daniel, not on the garden, because she knew that true love doesn't blossom all at once. It needs time, pain, and patience, and she was willing to give all three. The following days were filled with a painful silence. Daniel isolated himself in his office, and Clara paced the house as if carrying the weight of something inevitable. Lara sensed the mood, trying to understand why the laughter had disappeared. "Is he mad at me?" she asked one night. Clara simply replied, "No, my love. Sometimes adults hide when they're hurt." The next morning, Daniel called her. His gaze was weary, his voice too firm. "Clara, I think it's best if you leave. Lara gets too attached, and I can't allow that." Her heart sank. "Attachment is what keeps us alive, Daniel." He looked away. "I've lived enough." The words cut through the air. Clara just nodded, her tears held back. Hours later, she told Lara. The girl cried softly, hugging her teddy bear. "But you promised you'd take care of the garden." Clara caressed her face. "And I will, even from afar. Flowers grow when the heart believes." On the day of departure, Clara left a note on Daniel's desk. "Don't turn off the light again. The garden needs the sun to stay alive." Without her, the house fell asleep again. Lara stopped smiling. The garden withered. Daniel alone realized that the emptiness was worse than the pain. One night, he found his daughter in the backyard, hugging the bear. "Why did you send her away, Daddy?" Daniel choked back tears. "Because I'm scared," Lara replied, "but fear doesn't make the garden grow." He stood in silence, staring at the closed gate. On the ground, among the dry leaves, a small green shoot was emerging. It was fragile, but stubborn. Daniel smiled sadly. "Maybe the garden hasn't given up on me yet." The next weeks were bleak, but something began to change. One day, Daniel found a notebook forgotten in Clara's old room. It contained her notes about Lara, the garden, and him. "Your Montenegro carries within himself the same garden he fears to look at. If one day he has the courage to water it, he will find flowers." Daniel read in silence, and for the first time in years, he cried without shame.
Moved by something new, he began tending the garden alone. He pruned branches and removed dead leaves, and Lara, curious, began helping him. The work became a kind of prayer. The flowers bloomed again, and with them a discreet peace. One afternoon, Daniel found a box buried underground. Inside, an old letter from Helena read, "If the garden dies, it's because love has given up too, but it always comes back, if you let it." He understood. Love hadn't died, it was just waiting for light. That night, he told Lara about the note and said, "I think Mommy wants us to bloom again." The girl smiled. And Clara, too. The next day, Daniel went into town. He found Clara at a nursing home, helping the elderly. When she saw him, she was surprised. "What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath. "I came to ask you to come back, not just home, but to us." Clara hesitated. "And your fear?" He smiled. "It's still with me, but now I know how to deal with it." She smiled, her eyes welling up. "Then the garden is ready." When they reached the mansion, Lara ran to the gate, shouting his name. The garden was covered in flowers, illuminated by the setting sun. Daniel looked around and said, "He's back to life." Clara replied, "No, Daniel. Us, we live again." Clara's return brought life back to the mansion. Lara smiled again, Daniel seemed lighter, and the garden bloomed brightly, colorful and full of aroma. The afternoons were filled with laughter, and the piano, previously silent, played again. For the first time, love and longing coexisted without pain. But one rainy night, something unexpected happened. Clara awoke and realized Lara wasn't in her room. Her heart raced. She ran out, calling the girl's name, until she saw a small silhouette walking in the middle of the garden under the storm. Daniel ran after her. "What's happening?" he shouted. "She's out there." When they reached the center of the garden, they found Lara kneeling before the flowers, smiling. "Mommy says the garden is alive again." Daniel fell to his knees, hugging her tightly. "My love, you scared me." "She told us to play, Daddy." The rain washed over his face, mingling with the tears that were finally escaping.
Back at the house, Daniel hugged Clara and Lara as if clinging to life. "I almost lost everything again." Clara looked him in the eyes. "You didn't, Daniel. You just found yourself." It was then that he kissed her, a tender, true kiss, which sealed the end of the pain and the beginning of a new time. That early morning, under the light rain, the three of them stood silently, observing the garden. "Can you believe she was there?" Daniel asked. Clara smiled. "I don't think she ever left. She was just waiting for love to bloom again." The wind blew through the flowers, and for a moment it seemed as if the garden itself breathed with them. The morning sun illuminated the garden like a blessing. Lara ran among the flowers, her laughter echoing through the house. Daniel and Clara watched from the porch, exchanging a silent look, the look of those who have survived the darkness. The lavender was full, and among them, small daisies had sprouted on their own. "I didn't plant those," Clara said. Daniel smiled. "Maybe she did this for us." That day, Daniel organized a simple lunch in the garden. Laughter filled the air. Helena dreamed of seeing this place full of life. I think, somehow, she managed it. Clara nodded, moved. The sound of the piano drifted from the porch, a soft melody, similar to one Daniel had played in the past. Later, with Lara asleep in Clara's lap, Daniel broke the silence. "When Helena died, I thought I'd never be able to love again."
Clara looked away, her heart racing. He continued, "But you showed me that love doesn't end. It just changes form." She smiled, her eyes welling up. So the garden fulfilled its promise. That night, Clara dreamed of Helena walking among the flowers, smiling. "Thank you for taking care of them," the soft voice said. When she woke, dawn was tinging the sky pink and gold. Daniel was waiting for her on the porch. "I dreamed of her too," he confessed. Clara replied with a smile. "Then the garden is complete." He cupped her face and said, "No, Clara, the garden is just beginning." And under the golden light of the new day, their kiss sealed their reunion, the true blossoming of love that overcame pain. Time passed, and the garden became the heart of the house. The flowers danced in the wind. The scent of lavender mingled with Laura's laughter, and Daniel seemed like a different man, light, present, alive. Clara, now part of the family, tended the plants and souls with the same delicacy. The mansion, once cold, breathed love. One afternoon, Daniel took Clara to a sunny lot in town. A new sign read, "Helena Garden." "I want grieving children to find here what we found, a new beginning." Clara smiled, her eyes welling up. She would be proud. Daniel looked at her tenderly. "She's proud, because you brought us back."
That night, the mansion's garden was illuminated with small lights strung between the trees. Daniel prepared a simple, symbolic dinner. "Remember when you arrived?" he asked. Clara laughed. "I remember. I thought this house would never smile again." Daniel held her hand. "And you ended up saving us all." The kiss that followed was sweet, full of gratitude and peace. The garden, a silent witness, seemed to glow with them. Love, at last, blossomed, not as an escape from the past, but as the ripe fruit of all they had learned to care for. The foundation, Helena Garden, became a refuge for dozens of children. Clara tenderly coordinated the project, while Daniel helped expand the dream. Lara, now more confident, guided the new children through the garden. "Here the flowers listened to secrets," she said with a smile. During the official inauguration, Clara spoke in front of everyone. "This garden was born of pain, but blossomed in love. May each flower remind you that life always finds a way to begin again." The audience applauded, and Daniel, moved, whispered, "You are the new soul of this place." That evening, Clara walked alone through the garden. She stopped before the old tree and felt the gentle wind touch her face, like an invisible caress. "Thank you, Helena," she murmured. Daniel approached from behind, hugging her. "She lives in all of this, in you, in Lara, in us." She smiled. "So she never left." On the porch, Lara watched the two and laughed softly. "Now the garden smells like love," she said to Dona Elsa, who replied with a smile, "and it will last forever." A year later, the Helena Garden bloomed in every season. Children played among the daisies and lavender, and the Montenegro mansion had become a home for new beginnings. Clara watched proudly. "Look what love has done, Daniel." He replied, "It just needed someone brave enough to believe again." Lara picked a flower and handed it to the nanny. "This one's for you. Mommy said it's special." Clara knelt, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, my love. Flowers talk, you know, and this one's telling us we made it." At dusk, the trio walked to the old tree. There, a small bronze plaque read, "For Helena, because love never dies, it just blooms in another form." The wind blew lightly, bringing the scent to flowers and a soft whisper, like a sweet farewell. Daniel took Clara's hand and said, "The garden is complete." She smiled. "No, Daniel, the garden has just started." And as the sun set, the flowers seemed to bow before them,
witnesses to a love that was born from pain, grew with hope, and was eternalized in the perfume of life. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel, because here, each new story is a seed of hope. May your heart also blossom with us, and may love never cease to find its way even in the most forgotten gardens.